Are you friends with Patrick?
We're recording, just waiting. We're live.
We're live. Okay, we are live on this morning with Susan David, and you do not want to miss this. I'm going to give you a moment to get a pen, get a piece of paper, and listen to Susan, because Susan has written this incredible book. It's called Emotional Agility. Emotional agility. You need to be emotionally resilient. And I love what she says here. Get unstuck, embrace change, and thrive in work and life. Thrive in work and life. Get unstuck, embrace change. Well, definitely there's a lot of change going on in the world, in people's lives. I always say personal, professional, political change occurring, and people feel, you know, like they can't almost handle it. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
She also wrote Quiet, and she has a lot of really good suggestions. But I think the most important thing you're saying is you actually are a counter voice to the voices of so many people telling us, be positive, be happy, have a great mood, and everything will be fine.
Absolutely. So just by way of background, I grew up in apartheid South Africa. And while I was a white South African and therefore not subject to so much of the chaos and cruelty that so many of my friends were, from a very young age, just noticing what was going on around, I became interested in this central question that I focus on in emotional agility. What does it take internally in the way we deal with our thoughts, our emotions, and our stories that ultimately help us to thrive in the world? And one of the things that I've discovered both in my research, I'm a psychologist at Harvard Medical School, as well as in the broader research, is that this incessant focus on just be positive, just think positive, actually undermines our resilience.
Now explain that, because I think that was really something that I found particularly hopeful, actually, that telling people to just be happy, what's wrong with you, have a good attitude, that it actually hurts.
It really does. And I had my own experience with this. When I was 15 years old, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I had this whole group of people coming to me and saying to me, just be positive, everything will be fine, everything will be okay. But it wasn't okay. My father was dying and then dead. And I engaged in a relationship with this amazing teacher who, instead of saying to me, just be positive, what she did is she showed up to me. She invited me to explore in writing. She was an English teacher, and she invited me to explore in a journal what I was going through. And what I realized afterwards was that the just be positive didn't help me. What did help me was engaging with myself in a way that was honest, including my regrets, my heartache, and that ultimately that experience, that language, was what helped me to become resilient. A friend of mine who recently actually died of stage 4 breast cancer described this focus on being happy all the time as the tyranny of positivity.
Tyranny
of positivity.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, she said to me, you know, if it was just a case of being positive, the friends in my stage 4 breast cancer support group would be alive today, because they were the most positive people you met. And somehow, by telling us to just be positive and think positive, what it does is it actually makes us feel culpable in our own death.
Wow.
That somehow we weren't positive enough, we couldn't think ourselves out of the situation. And what it stops me doing is being authentic with myself, with my experience, and being able to be present with the people that I love.
So how do we, Susan, get unstuck? How do we be authentic with ourselves? And if we encounter someone today or any day this week or in the next couple of days who says, I'm having a really bad day. I'm really struggling. My mother used to say, first of all, I would never even dare say to my mother, I'm having a bad day, I'm struggling. But she used to always say, I don't want to hear a yip out of you, get going, you don't live in Biafra. And I'd be like, wow. And so I didn't feel like I grew up in a home where I had permission to complain. And I think I maybe carried that on a little bit even into my own children when they were young. And I've tried to open a space for them to complain. But where's the balance?
So firstly, what we know is that people who focus on being happy actually over time become less happy. And just to be clear, I'm not anti-happiness. I've written an entire book called The Oxford Handbook of Happiness. So it's not that I'm anti-happiness, it's more that our happiness comes not as a goal, but as a byproduct of engaging in a voice and in actions and in an honesty with ourselves.
But how do we do that?
And
You
so
lay it out.
We do this in very particular ways. One of the first things that I talk about is showing up. And what I mean by showing up is, instead of trying to push our emotions aside or trying to put on a happy face, do what I call bottling and brooding, instead to literally drop any struggle that you have within yourself by ending the battle. So by not saying to yourself, I'm unhappy, but I shouldn't be unhappy, or I'm miserable in my job, but at least I've got a job, and try rationalize yourself out of it. Really just by opening our hearts up to the fact that we have a full range of emotions,
Right.
that these emotions have helped us and evolved to enable us to position ourselves effectively in the world and to not struggle with that. So the first part of emotional agility is really about showing up to those emotions.
Right, and then you have a couple other steps. What are they?
Absolutely. So showing up with compassion, with kindness, and
Right.
so on. One of the other things that I talk about is stepping out of our emotions. So it's really
Detaching.
important. Yeah, it's important to recognize that our emotions contain data. When I'm feeling guilty, I've never met a mother who's feeling guilty about her parenting,
Who's not feeling guilty.
yeah, well, who at some level is wanting to be present and connected with her children.
Right.
I've never met someone who's upset that their idea was stolen at work who isn't at some level concerned about issues of equity and fairness. So beneath our difficult emotions are signposts to the things that we value.
Okay,
And
so
if
that's really
instead
important.
of struggling with whether we should or shouldn't feel something, it's important for us to say, what is the function of this emotion? What is the value? What is this emotion trying to tell me? Now, within that, it's important for us to recognize that our emotions are data, not directions.
Right.
So because you feel guilty doesn't mean you need to feel guilty.
Right.
Because you feel angry doesn't mean you need to go out and attack the people that you're angry with. So we can create space, which is the stepping out part.
Right, and so your theory is that if we get to know ourselves, if we slow down enough in our life, kind of figure out what is really going on with us, give ourselves space to complain, to write, which releases a lot of the emotions. You talk about carving out time to write, and it doesn't have to be shown to anybody. It's just to kind of help you with your own emotion.
Yes.
That in turn, and you find your way, allows you to get unstuck and be stronger, and then hence happier.
Absolutely. One of the most beautiful embodiments of emotional agility comes from Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi death camps. And the idea that's been attributed to him in his writing is this: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. And it's in that choice that comes our growth and freedom. What I talk about in emotional agility is how so often we get hooked by our emotions and thoughts. We treat them as fact. So
Right.
there's no space between the stimulus and response. If we can create space, labeling our emotions effectively, instead of saying, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, there's a very big difference between being stressed versus disappointed, or stressed versus disillusioned or angry.
Yeah.
So if we can label our emotions effectively, if we can recognize that even when I say something like, I am stressed, what you're doing is you are identifying all of you with being stressed. So I talk about very practical strategies. I'm noticing that I'm feeling angry. I'm noticing that I'm feeling stressed. What you're doing here is, instead of being one and the same as stress, you are recognizing that you're experiencing an emotion.
Right.
But the other parts of you that
That's my kids, and I forgot to turn off my phone, but keep going. So I'm like
one
emotionally
of the
stressed.
things that I talk about is distraction.
Distraction. I have a distracted mind. That's my daughter, but I normally always pick up the phone,
Well,
right? But now I can't even turn it off. But anyway,
I talk about in emotional agility. I talk about how multitasking
Is not
is
good.
the equivalent of drunk driving.
that's correct. I actually just did a story that I'm going to do for the Today Show about the distracted
Yes,
mind and the importance
yes.
really of quieting your mind.
Quieting your mind.
And you, I know, talk about that.
So I talk about that, and I also talk about, so it's showing up, stepping out, creating
Great.
space.
I
But
love
then
that.
there are other very important aspects of this.
Walking
one of
your
the things
why.
I speak about, which
I
is
love that.
so powerful, is starting to hear the heartbeat of our own why. We live in a world where everyone is telling us what to think, how to look, how to
Amen.
feel, what car we should drive. And there's fascinating research showing that without us even realizing it, we are subject to what is called social contagion, where we start subtly picking up the behaviors of others. We go into an elevator, everyone's looking at their phones, so we take out ours. We know that if you're on an aeroplane and you're trying to lose weight, if your seat partner buys candy, even if you don't know that person,
Yeah.
you are 30% more likely to buy candy.
Yeah.
If people in your social network put on weight or get divorced, even if you don't know them, you are more likely. So
I saw that last night. I was on a
Yeah.
plane, and the guy next to me got pretzels and peanuts and chips, and I was like, maybe I should have some of those chips. They really smell good.
least one of them,
Yeah, at
you
least
know.
one bag, because like I'm not. And then you're having a whole debate with yourself. It's like I really didn't want them, but they smelled so good, and he looked fine.
Yeah.
and he was eating.
And,
So
and
it's
we're
social
subject,
contagion.
We're subject to the social contagion. And
Okay.
yet, if we start to hear the heartbeat of our own why, our own values, who do I want to be in this situation? Who do I want to be in this discussion? Who do I want to be in this world? It actually protects us from social contagion.
And now Susan has a quiz, and I took this last night to kind of gauge your own emotional agility, to look at what do you value, and where can they go and take the quiz?
So if listeners want to take the quiz, it's at susandavid.com. So SUSANDAVID.com/learn.
So you go on here, and they ask you questions that only takes like 10 minutes. And then they ask you about what do you value, what are your values, and you have to list them in three, in order 1, 2, 3, and then they ask you how well you're doing at implementing your values into your daily life, and then you get a report about how well you're actually doing, what you need to work on. I wasn't doing as well with my values as I could be doing. I wasn't making them actually come to life as much as I thought I was, so I thought that was really interesting, what it told me about me.
Did it feel connected?
Yes,
Did it feel
definitely,
resonant with you?
yeah, it did feel resonant.
Yeah.
It kind of ticked me off at the end because I was like 1, 2, 3, and then I was like, no, I'm not doing as well with 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
But I think that's always to become more self-aware, and I think this is a lot of what you're talking about. One of the things I really liked here is that kind of we all use this: I'm mad, I'm stressed, I'm this, but to actually expand your emotional vocabulary, particularly if you're in a relationship, if you're a parent, instead of saying to your kids, I can't talk now, I'm just stressed, to actually you lay out all of these different emotions, what stress actually means. Maybe you're
Yes.
scared, maybe you're afraid, maybe you failed at the office, and they ask you to use other words
Yeah.
to describe what you're doing, which help you and the person.
This is a really critical skill. Again, we live in a world where we often use just 3 or 4 emotions to describe what we're feeling. And yet what the research shows, so my background is as an emotions researcher, and what we know from the research is that when we use more differentiated language about our emotions,
Yeah.
and when we help our children to do the same, that it actually helps us over time to become more resilient, and those people actually do better over time. So it's a really, really critical skill set. And one of the things that I talk about in the quiz that people can take, and around 40,000 people have taken this at this point, is this idea of how do we engage and in very practical ways with ourselves in a way that is curious and compassionate, label our emotions effectively, and also come to a point where we are able to say, you know, this is the way that I want to be in this situation. You know, when we think about values are often thought of as these very abstract things. You know, they on walls in offices, but ultimately have little meaning. But actually, every single day, all of us have hundreds of opportunities to either make a choice that is toward our values. Do I buy the thing on the aeroplane or do I not? Or away from our values. And so if we can start recognizing that values are actually qualities of action rather than these abstract things in our mind, it actually helps us in a real way to thrive.
Now, I think what's important to me anyway about this book and about agility and resilience is the idea that everybody is going to need and needs resilience to get through life, because no matter who you are, stuff happens.
Yes.
Stuff you didn't anticipate,
Yep.
stuff that's difficult, stuff that's painful, and you need to be resilient, right?
Yeah.
You need to build up your resilience from a very early age. Now we hear a lot about how to raise resilient
Yep.
children. But what about for adults who weren't raised perhaps to express their emotions, to think about their values, to write, who may struggle with depression, who may struggle with that critical voice? How can they build resilience in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s?
Absolutely. So what we know is that people can develop the capability around these skills. And you're so right. One of the things I talk about in this book is how life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. You know, our package that we get with life is that it's simultaneously beautiful and fragile. We healthy until we're not. We're with the people we love until we aren't. We nag our children to clean their rooms until one day we walk in and the child is off at college and we aren't seeing them. And so really developing this capability is really important. And absolutely, we know that, for example, when we are raised, very often there are these things called display rules. So display rules are often the implicit or sometimes even explicit rules that families have about which emotions are okay. You know, go to your room when you're angry and come out when you've got a smile on your face, or we don't do sadness here. And we can carry these display rules through us into our lives. And this can lead to situations where we no longer trust our emotions or no longer even are open to what we're experiencing. And so very much in emotional agility, I describe this very practical way of firstly trying to welcome your emotions, to not fight with them. They're there for a reason, and that reason is to actually help us to calibrate and position ourselves more effectively in the world.
And also, as you say, to know yourself better, and
To
that
know
doesn't
yourself.
mean you're a narcissist, doesn't mean you're selfish, doesn't mean
Absolutely.
you're self-centered. We want to say, you know, we always try to talk here in this space to what we call architects of change,
Yes.
which is what Susan is. And those are people we identify as people who challenge what is, imagine what can be, and move humanity forward. And you very kindly have asked people to think about how they would like to move humanity forward, and you're going to give out 5 of these books, Emotional Agility. 5 of these books will go out to people who actually take the time to write down how they want to move humanity forward. And what we always say here, Susan, is that moving humanity forward starts with yourself.
Yeah.
It starts at your own kitchen table, how you interact with other people. Do you know your neighbors? Do you get involved in your local community? What kind of parent are you? What kind of citizen are you? You don't have to be running for office, that's great too, but to be an architect of change. And that's why we try to talk to people from all walks of life. And in your words and in your opinion, how do you feel you're moving humanity forward? What kind of society do you envision if everybody were to read this book? What would be the direct result of that?
So the first thing that I envision is a society in which we are more compassionate with ourselves as well as with others.
Okay.
The second thing that I would see is a society that isn't driven by anger or sadness or any particular emotion, but rather that is driven by values. And so in my work, really what I'm trying to do is help people to become more connected with themselves and to recognize that so much of the change, to what you spoke to earlier, is not about making these big, ginormous changes,
Right.
but what in emotional agility I call tiny tweaks. You know,
Tiny
the tiny
tweak.
tweak of, I love this person, but every time they come home from work, I hardly get up from my computer to even say hello to them. Or I want to be a present parent, and yet I'm on my cell phone with my children at the dinner table.
So those are two tiny tweaks that
They're
can move your relationship
tiny
forward.
tweaks. If you make a small change, and in emotional agility, I talk about also how we can take a habit that we've already got. So a habit where you put your keys into a particular drawer, where you can piggyback onto that habit, putting your cell phone into the drawer as well, in ways that are values aligned, so that you having this now conversation with your child where you aren't on the phone.
Right.
And so this whole idea is really about how do we enter into a space that allows us to be more honest, more connected, and to make actual changes on the ground. And the hope from my work is that people can engage in that space where they are more compassionate, more connected with their values, and more able to bring their values to their everyday lives so that they can thrive in the way they love, live, parent, and lead.
And then that will make you happy.
As a byproduct.
As a byproduct. But you're not shooting for happiness.
Correct.
You're shooting to be, and we always say about creating a more conscious, caring, and compassionate community, country, and world. And that begins with each and every one of us. So if you want to get a free copy of Susan's book, Emotional Agility, and you want to get unstuck, embrace change, and thrive in work and life, and who doesn't, by the way. And if you want to be actually
Yeah.
resilient yourself so that you can handle whatever life throws at you, and life does throw stuff at you, and so kind of being able to say, like, okay, this is hard. I don't have to medicate it. I don't have to drink it away.
Yeah.
I can feel it. I can write it down.
Yeah.
I can rip it up, and I can make it.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, and that enables us to also do the same with our children,
Right.
to allow them to create the space to feel jealousy or to feel anger or to feel whatever they feel. And I have a chapter on raising emotionally agile children in the book, because these same principles apply to them. By 2030, the World Health Organization predicts that depression, not cancer, not heart disease, not diabetes, depression will be the leading cause of disability globally. And our children are growing up in a world that is unprecedented in terms of its complexity, its change,
yeah.
its geopolitical tension, technology, and so on. And so really starting to cultivate these skills in ourselves as well as others is critical. And just to listeners, if you do want to get a copy of Emotional Agility, we're going to draw 5 copies, as Maria mentioned. So please, online, on the Facebook Live, answer the question, how would you see yourself as being an architect of change in your own life? It might be at your dinner table,
Right.
or it might be out in the world, but that's a core question that I think we really want to bring to the surface here, especially at this time in our country.
Well, I always say that whatever you're doing in your own life and in your own home does impact the world, right? Because what the world actually needs are people who are conscious, who are caring, who are compassionate, who see themselves as citizens and believe that they're here, as we all are, for some specific purpose and reason. And to find that, you need to have a advanced emotional vocabulary, you need to slow down, and you need to kind of be aware, which I love that, aware of how susceptible you may be to this thrown off my values, or I find myself confused.
Yeah.
And so I think this book is coming at an incredibly important time.
Thank you.
We all need to be emotionally agile, resistant, strong, intelligent, and this is a whole new field. So I want to thank
It's
you,
really
and it's backed up
important.
by
Thank
science,
you.
so it's not some woo-woo conversation, as my
Yeah.
brothers sometimes say to me.
Thank
That's
you.
brothers,
Well,
yeah.
one of the things I just wanted to say in closing that I think is so many people are feeling really troubled at the moment, and one of the things I talk about in the book is this idea that often when we think about being fearful or being angry, people tell us to control our fear, control our anger,
Yeah.
do away with it. And one of the things that I talk about that I think is a nice place to leave this is that courage, when we think about courage, courage is not the absence of fear.
Right.
These emotions are normal and, as I say, help us to position ourselves effectively in the world. Courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is fear walking.
Right.
And what I mean by that is it's not about
I
doing
am so courageous.
away with your fear, but it's about recognizing your fear, recognizing your anger,
Yeah.
and still choosing to walk in the direction of your values.
Exactly. Susan, thank
you.
you so
Thank you,
much.
thank
Take the
you.
quiz. I took it. It's fun. It's interesting. And I think it's always great to know more about who you are and what you're putting out in the world and maybe what you want to be putting out and finding the balance between all of that. So have a great day. We're going to see you a bit later on with Andy Petticombe, who is the co-founder of Headspace, who's also trying to help us create the kind of world that we've been talking about today, who's trying to move humanity forward through meditation. You're trying to move humanity forward person by person, idea at a time. And that's what's so exciting, is that there's a whole world of people who really are trying to move us towards a more caring and compassionate world, and they have a home and a place always right here with us. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Emotional
So
agility.
great connecting.
Get
Thank you.
unstuck.